Al Floss presents the complete and alarming history of America's greatest garage band, the Stools.
This was a point in time where rock and roll was actually fracturing. Abe Lincoln, a DJ at KSYD in Wichita Falls, tried to start a movement where all DJs would stop playing records that actually mention Dick Clark's American Bandstand in it. I mean, why promote a TV show that's trying to put radio out of business? Seems like there had been a spate of rock songs using the word bandstand in the lyrics, from bands trying to curry favor with Dick Clark. The Stools vowed to never use the word in a song, and to this date, they still haven't.
Dick Clark wasn't the guy behind American Bandstand. They kept Clark in some cryogenic freezer and defrosted him and put him in front of a camera when it was time to do the show. And when it was over, boom, back into the freezer. The real puppet master was this ape named Tony Mammarella.
You'd never get an act on Bandstand if you didn't grease Mammarella's palm or some other body part. Under the name Tony September, Mammarella was born in September. He is credited with writing a bunch of songs he had nothing to do with.
The Silhouettes had to give Mammarella a half share in the publishing rights to the song Get a Job before they could perform it on Bandstand. They also gave him half the publishing on their second single, Heading for the Poorhouse, but he never came through for them. They never sang it on Bandstand, and it was really never a hit, and the Silhouettes all went back to their day jobs.
You know, if you appeared on American Bandstand, you had to kick back part of your salary. An act would get hired at union scale, but then part, or sometimes all of that payment, would have to be reimbursed into the Bandstand producing company by the act's manager or by the record label.
Tony Mammarella was a World War II vet, but he started out on the switchboard, answering phones like some skirt. But he did end up producing American Bandstand.
Now, the original host of American Bandstand was a guy named Bob Horn, and Tony was the producer. But Horn got busted for drunk driving with an underage girl in his car or something like that, and Mammarella stepped in as host. But before you knew it, Dick Clark was brought in and Mammarella was brushed off stage, back to his office, and I gotta tell you, that couldn't have sat very well with him.
Bob Horn was a dog, always chasing the dames. So Mammarella's first order of business was to make sure that Dick Clark's image came across as squeaky clean.
Among other things, Mammarella, or Tony Mozzarella as his friends called him, started Swan Records with Dick Clark and Bernie Bicknick. The first act they signed was Dickie Do and the Don't, and they didn't know anything about the music business. It was just a money grab for them.
Dickie Do was really a guy named Jerry Granahan who sent Clark a copy of his demo, Click Clack. Clark liked it and wanted it to be his first single. But Granahan was already signed to Atco Records, so Clark and Mammarella made up the name Dickie Do and the Don'ts and illegally put it out anyway.
Jerry Granahan was a hustler, and he had a record deal with Sunbeam label as the Fireflies. But he would tour as Dickie Do and the Don'ts, the Fireflies, or Jerry Granahan, depending on which band could book the gig.
Of course, later, when Capitol Records wouldn't put out the Beatles' She Loves You, it fell right into the lap of Swan. And from there, Swan got Freddie Boom Boom Cannon, they got Link Ray, they got a few others. I think they really only sold about 1,000 copies of She Loves You. Swan guys, real dopes.
Tony Mammarella even put out his own song on Swan, Eve of Tomorrow. Terrible song, sunk like a stone.
Tony Mammarella's Eve of Tomorrow was a condescendingly moralizing answer song to Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction. It had a marching drum beat, it had a female soul singer who was just wailing in the background as Mammarella blathered on about how mutual assured destruction was a good thing. And nobody was going to push the button as long as we had a button too.
I think my favorite line from the song is, if you're going to say uncle, make it Uncle Sam.
Mamarella also had a company with Dick Clark that made stupid little stuffed cats that were sold on American Bandstand. They were called platypuses.
After the Great Payola Scare, you could either be in broadcasting or the music publishing business. You couldn't do both. Dick Clark stayed at ABC, and Tony Mamarella stayed on at Swan Records.
This is key here. Alan Freed is often looked on as the scapegoat for the payola scandal, but I think Tony might have fallen on the sword for Dick Clark, too.
A lot of people consider Tony Mamarella to be a low-life scumbag, but his last job was as a PR director for the Girl Scouts of Southern New Jersey, so come on, how bad could the guy be?
Say what you will about Tony Mozzarella, but he's the one that got the black kids dancing with the white kids on American Bandstand. And that's got to count for something.
1958 is also the year of the Christmas rock and roll song. You had Jingle Bell Rock, Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree, the Chipmunks song. The Stools were quick to jump on the bandwagon with Santa Copped a Tude.
Well, the busy working, tipping out to Union Shop. 5 o'clock whistle blow, all the work is stopped. They put away the tools, they hit the North Pole Inn. If I drink it there, cause it only reindeer in. Well, you can party all night, but look out for the old dude. It's the night before Christmas and Santa copped it too, yeah. Santa back half empty, productivity down. Elves are slacking off, there's not enough toys to go round. Santa won't get no dolly, Jimmy won't get no train. Reindeer won't take off, they've been socked in by the rain. Well, you can wait up all night, but the morning truth is rude. It's the night before Christmas and Santa's got the two, yeah! Santa's on your rooftop, come down your fireplace. Wake up old grandma, who soaks him down with mace. Rover bites his leg, and daddy pulls a gun. Mama called policeman, run, Rudolph, run. Or you could wait up all night, get in the Yule mood, but your sock will be empty, cause Santa's got me too, yeah! On Christmas, I'd rather not discuss. Cause Jenny is a-sleeping, sugar plums in her head. Santa comes a-creeping, sneaks up on her bed. Wake up in the morning, she finds her eyes are glued. Cause it's the night before Christmas and Santa's got me too, yeah! Why, you can party all night, but look out for the old dude. It's the night before Christmas and Santa's got me too, yeah!
Along with Stan Freberg's satire on advertising, Green Christmas, the Stools' Santa Copped a Tude was banned by most radio stations across the country and parts of Mexico.
Hi, I'm famous radio personality Charles Laquadera, here to tell you about a fantastic offer from our friends at Dutchco. It's a brand new long-playing album called For Lovers Only, the great love songs of the Stools. And you can only get it by taking advantage of this great TV offer.
That's right, Charles. For Lovers Only, the greatest love songs of the Stools is only available for a limited time. And you get such heartwarming hits as Alligator Arms, She's Just Naturally Horizontal, and the favorite of lovers everywhere, Wintershins.
Wintershins, Wintershins. We'll never talk of this again. Wintershins.
But that's not all. You also get the hits Frat Girl, Jackson Hole, and What's That You Say?
Hey, and what about my favorite? Kiss Me Good Morning Too.
You know it, Charles. Everyone's favorite love songs of the Stools are included in this massive 2-disc set. So call now, and you could be enjoying songs like Ain't That the Berries within 4 to 6 weeks. Don't like the telephone? And who does? Just mail your check to Dutchco Teleproducts, Inc., Elks Grove Village, Illinois, 60007, USA.
Because if it says it's Dutchco, it's so-so.
Things really started to pick up for the Stools in 1959.
In January of 1959, the Stools were asked to fill in for Tommy Leonetti on the Dick Clark Show. Leonetti had been dropped because word got out that he had testified before a Senate committee that his manager had tried to force jukebox owners to stock his records.
The Stools were a lot of things, but they weren't snitches. And it paid off for them in '59, at least with Dick Clark.
You know Elvis, Buddy Holly, Bill Haley, Hank Williams, they all have stamps. The Stools really should have a postage stamp with their picture on it.
You know you have to be dead to get a postage stamp.
Ah, I didn't. Well, I guess it's a good thing they don't have a stamp yet, but still.
Although Antonio Moretti, the most politically active of the Stools, campaigns tirelessly against it, Alaska is admitted to the United States in 1959.
In 1959, Elvis was in the Army. Jerry Lee Lewis had shacked up with his cousin, and Little Richard found religion. But the biggest blow to rock and roll was about to come.
It wasn't Buddy Holly's plane crash that killed off rock and roll, although that was pretty bad. Just not as bad as Fabian and that ilk.
Fabian. That was American Bandstand at its most evil.
Fabian was really one of the first manufactured pop stars. Bob Marcucci at Chancellor Records found him on the streets of Philly when he was 14. Stuck a couple of bucks in Dick Clark's pocket, and boom, he was the next big thing on Bandstand.
Fabian grew up in Philly's South Side, just blocks away from Frankie Avalon, Bobby Rydell, and Antonio Moretti.
They had this great Fabian is coming. Who is Fabian? Campaign on the streets, no last name, just Fabian. Lots of mystery around him.
Up until then, your only stars with one name were dogs, you know? Lassie, Rin Tin Tin, Rex the Wonder Dog, and here comes Fabian.
Fabian was one of the first acts to have his voice significantly improved electronically in the studio. Of course, now your pop stars won't say good morning without strapping on the auto-tune, but back then it was a big secret.
I think it's telling that in the summer of '58, Fabian's first appearance on Bandstand, he didn't sing. He just stood there and looked pretty, and the girls ate it up. In fact, so much so that they had him back a week and a half later. Again, no singing, just stood there. Wasn't until December 6th that he actually sang on the program, and even then, he didn't really sing, he just lip-synced.
Funny story. Fabian and his manager, Bobby Marcucci, they go to the movies. Marcucci tells Fabian to sit in the middle of the row, but Fabian sits in the aisle. A fan sees Fabian on the aisle and starts to scream, of course. So they have to run out of the movie theater before they get mobbed, missing the movie completely. So Marcucci is pissed because he wanted to see the movie and hauls off and slugs Fabian. Well, Fabian is 18 now and he's had enough. So he buys out his contract from Marcucci for $65,000 and literally walks away from music. 11 hit singles and he just walks away and turns his focus to acting.
Fabian's first movie at Fox was Hound Dog Man. I think it's pretty telling that Fox had Fabian screen test for the film wearing the same costume that Elvis had worn in Love Me Tender.
Although he was married 3 times, Fabian reportedly was declared 4F in the draft for giving them a doctor's note that said induction into the Army would cause him to develop homosexual tendencies.
Fabian was actually one of Sandy Meisner's acting students and had an okay run in movies. But in 1973, he tried to revive his singing career and even posed in Playgirl, trying to raise his profile.
Taylor Hackford made a movie in 1980 called The Idol Maker, based on Fabian's story, and it pretty much followed Fabian's arc. And ironically, Fabian sued the filmmaker for it, but he was also a consultant on the film, so how far off the mark could it be?
His episode of Laverne and Shirley was my favorite.
Fabian's brother is the Marlins play-by-play guy, Frank Forte. Just saying.
Eventually, he became a Nutrisystem spokesman and ended up in Branson like they all do. But Fabian and the rest of the pretty boy teen idols' effect was felt by rock and roll. Pop was now king.
The teen idols were presented as a wholesome bunch, non-threatening. So parents didn't mind their teenage girls hanging their pictures up in their room and throwing some money at these pop stars.
The Stools knew they could never compete with the teen idols in the good looks department, so they tried to do it by pandering to the kids' parents with their music and released the adult, jazz-friendly, Sweet Little Heffer that wisely actually spoke to the teenagers' insecurities as well.
You look great, you look swell. Tell your father to go to hell. Yo, my sweet little heifer. Now don't you fret or change a thing. Just come running when the dinner bell rings. 'Cause yo, my sweet little heifer. Some girls give in to the pressure of clicking tongues and the tape measure. But as long as we're together, you can do no wrong whatsoever. Take a chill pill, just relax. Tell them to mind their own beeswax. 'Cause yo, my sweet little heifer. Some folks think they are being parental when all they're doing is being judgmental. I don't think they see your potential. Haven't they read Gregor Mendel? You look swell, you look great, shaped just like a figure eight. Yeah, you're my sweet little heifer. Yeah, you're my sweet little heifer.
Sweet Little Heifer was one of the first songs the Stools recorded at their new base of operations, Boston. Al Floss had moved everyone up to the Boston area because he had heard about the curative properties of the North Atlantic air.
There was a set of vibes in the studio that Elvin taught himself to play during the coffee breaks, predating Gary Burton's revolutionary four-mallet technique by at least 3 years.
The only real music in Boston at the time were the G-Clefs. They were 4 brothers and a kid that lived down the street that had a couple of top 40 hits. They started as a street gang, the Band of Angels, and then they realized rather than shake the local kids down for their milk money, they could just put on concerts in the backyard and charge the kids to hear them sing.
Oh yeah, the G-Clefs were Boston's first rock band. They had a couple of hits on the charts, nothing huge. In 1956, they had a song, Ka-Ding Dong, which featured Freddie Boom Boom Cannon on guitar.
The only other single that the G-Clefs had that went national was I Understand in 1961. And that was just a ripoff of Old Lang Syne.
I think they bought their own club up on the North Shore, the Pied Piper, and they started doing 5 shows a night for the tourist trade. In a sense, that makes Revere Beach the Branson, Missouri of the 1950s.
Sweet Little Heifer and the Stools' other early '59 singles probably could have sold better, but Al Floss was occupied with other matters and didn't really push the singles like he had in the past.
At the time, Al Floss was just releasing everything the band came up with no real plan.
Now on February 20th of 1959, Al got ticked off at the Stools touring band and fired everybody, except of course for Cosmo, Elvin, and Antonio. This wasn't the last time this would happen. Interestingly enough, in the Pacific Northwest, a young guitarist was also getting fired from his first band, James Marshall Hendrix.
The story goes, a 16-year-old Jimi Hendrix is living in Seattle, and he gets a gig with a local band, whose name has been lost to history. But their very first gig is at the Temple de Hirsch Sinai Synagogue, whose music director is none other than Sam Goldfarb, the guy who co-wrote the Dreidel song.
Apparently, Hendrix had already developed his own style of playing, which got him fired from Ike Turner's band and Little Richard's band. And according to the synagogue's own newsletter, Goldfarb fired him between sets because of, quote, dropping to his knees, sticking his tongue out, and flailing his arms.
Of course, Hendrix never played with the Stools, but it's the guitar playing of both Hendrix and Johnny Guitar Watson that would influence the Stools as they moved away from their 50s rock and roll sound. Never more present than in yet another one of Elvin's songs about food, this time inspired by their time in England, Bubble and Squeak.
I'm just left over, pushed to the side. Whatever drove her no longer applied. Recede on, so to speak. I'm Bubble and Squeak. They picked at me, then thought twice. Was I too fattening or too good price? Unspoken, cutting critique. I'm Bubble and Squeak. I know I'm not fancy like bangers and mash, but I'm better than candy, and I'm making nice hash.
For the Stools, 1959 would hold more songs about food, the loss of old friends, and more than their fair share of conspiracies, which we will explore next time as the complete and alarming history of America's greatest garage band continues. Join us then, won't you?
And wildly, I'm Bubble and Squeak.